per fare
Li la li la,
Oio sushi baka.
chimpanzini, bananini.
I would consider myself a pretty nice guy, and I don't think I've ever crashed out before. However, yesterday I caught my creepy neighbor brutally diddling my dog, and so I decided to unleash the full power of the Alpha Sigma male. I began by grabbing him by the dingling, and I stretched it so long that I was able to tie him around one of those electric line poles. Next, I took some of my dog's poo and shoved it up his ass and finally taped it shut with duct tape. Anyways, apparently I'm not the only nice person that has snapped before. When nice people snapped in history by Serious History.
Being pushed over the edge mentally is not just a modern thing, and here are 3 times it happened in history with some pretty severe consequences. Number 1. Jean de Clisson. It's the year 1300, and a red-haired baby girl is born to a minor noble family in Brittany. Her parents name her Jean, and as they lean down to look at their adorable newborn baby, they smile and say, "Jackpot!" You see, Jean was a beautiful child, a very valuable asset in those days. So as soon as she was old enough, her parents eagerly married her off to a noble in exchange for a whole lot of land.
And so I guess you could say that she was born with good genes. Not funny. Okay, you get it. You sort of get it because it's like her name is Jean. Like it's like the French name Jean, but like they said jackpot because she was born with good genes. Yeah.
Being just 12 years old, Jean probably had no idea what love was. So she just went along with the plan and quickly had 2 kids with this guy and accepted that this was probably what her life was going to be. But 14 years later, her husband unexpectedly dies, and as a 26-year-old single mother in the Middle Ages, she needs to find someone else to marry to take care of her and her kids. She was still very young, and according to historical accounts, still super hot, so she quickly marries a member of the Breton ruling family. But his family thinks their guy would be better off marrying someone a little richer, and so they get the Pope to quickly annul their marriage. Jean then meets and marries another Breton noble named Olivier de Clisson. And this time, the vibes are completely different. Against all odds, in a time when marriage between nobles was usually just political, Jean and Olivier fall madly in love.
Bro, how many times is this person gonna get married? She's getting passed around like a blunt at a college party. And what's the Austrian painter doing here? I thought he was from a different time period, was he?
They go on to have 5 kids together, and life is perfect. A loving husband, beautiful children, wealth and power. What more could you want? But everything changes in 1341 when the Duke of Brittany dies without leaving a clear heir, and the family feud over who gets to be the next duke spirals into a 30-year war called the Breton War of Succession. The kings of England and France both rubbed their hands together, spying an opportunity to ensure the new duke would support them in their own 100 Years' War. So the English support John of Montfort, the half-brother of the Duke, while the French supported his niece and her husband Charles de Blois.
Bro, why does it look like this is some NBA draft? Why does it look like this homeless guy just got drafted pick number 1 in the NBA? So it's a war between the NBA and the WNBA. So this person picks someone else for the WNBA draft, and they're going to war against the NBA and then the number 1 pick.
Jean and her husband choose to support Charles de Blois and side with the French and their king Philip VI. Fighting for the French, Olivier and his army recapture the lost city of Vannes, but the victory is short-lived and the English quickly take it back. Olivier and other commanders there are captured, and for some reason he's traded back to the French for a suspiciously small amount of money, and this makes the French start to believe he's a traitor. The Pope comes in and calls a timeout on the war in 1343, and in this brief truce, the king invites Olivier and other nobles from Breton to Paris to participate in a tournament to celebrate the newfound peace.
Bro, since when could the Pope just come in here and call a timeout? Like, couldn't he just do this forever? Why can't he just call a timeout for like a million years? Like let's end the war. If we can end the war, why wouldn't they end the war? Is the Pope the main character in history? Does he really think he's the main character? Does he have plot armor? Is he invincible? What if someone just like, unalives him? Like, then no one else can call a timeout. Maybe the Pope was betting on the war. He was betting. It's sort of how like the NBA refs used to bet on the games, and then like, yeah, they got like fined and everything. I guarantee the Pope was secretly betting on the war. He was betting. He was choosing his sides.
Olivier thinks this is awesome and travels to France. But the second he steps onto French soil, he's arrested and taken prisoner. He's tried for treason and thrown into a dungeon to await his trial. Back in Breton, Jean finds out about this, rushes to Paris, and desperately tries to get her husband released, even going so far as to bribe the king's sergeant, but ultimately fails. Olivier's given a sham trial, and in August, he's marched out to the town square and publicly beheaded.
Ooh.
His body's then hung up in Paris, and his head was shipped off to Brittany to be displayed on a spike. Horrific for anyone, but for a noble to be treated like this was the ultimate disrespect. In Brittany, Jean brings her 2 youngest sons to look at their father's severed head. She forces them to stare at their father's pale, lifeless face that is now weeks old and is rotting and covered in a swarm of flies.
Bro, is this person serious? What type of mother are you? What sane mother would do this to their children? You're gonna force them to look at their own father's dead head, like just on a stick with like flies all over it? They look young as well. Like, bro, this would traumatize them for the rest of their life. Why would you even do this? Bro, this might actually be a worse mom than, what is it, like Ash Trevino? Is that her name?
Inside, she boils with rage and refuses to let her children look away. They must understand that the king must pay. And so, at the age of 43, Jean decides to dedicate the rest of her life to making the rest of King Philip's life a living hell. She breaks all ties to France and sells off her entire estate, land, jewelry, anything and everything she owned of value, and uses the cash to raise a small personal army. She arrives at Chateau de Tuffeau, a castle controlled by the French loyalists. She weeps loudly at the castle gates, asking for the men to allow a heartbroken widow entry. The commander of the castle looks down and recognizes her as a noble who supports Charles de Blois and opens the gates. Once the gates are open, Jean's army reveal themselves and storm into the castle. The castle garrison is caught off guard, and Jean orders her men to massacre them all.
Bro, this doesn't make any sense at all. How can this woman's Temu army, like her homemade DIY Temu army, overpower the actual king's proper army? Like, wouldn't these people be heavily trained? So you're telling me this woman found a bunch of homeless people and trained them to be even better than the king's actual, like, personal bodyguards?
She spares just one man and gives him instructions to give King Philip the regards of Jean de Clisson. She continued to sack castles along the Normandy coast with her personal army, and eventually she buys 3 warships which she paints black and dyes their sails blood red. She names her flagship My Revenge and essentially becomes a pirate.
Bro, what is this progression? Like, we're going too fast. We're going way too fast. I don't understand what's happening. How does she go from raising a small Temu army to buying 3 ships? Like, where does she get the money from? Is this some, like, money laundering? Like, does she run, like, an illegal underground gambling ring? So she's on a mission. She's just been plowing through every single castle in France. And now she's on the search for the One Piece. She's gonna find, I guarantee she will find the One Piece before Luffy does.
She carries with her a massive axe and begins terrorizing French merchant ships in the English Channel. Her tactics are brutal, as she's not so interested in looting. Her only goal is revenge on the French. The crew of every ship she targets is slaughtered, and she personally beheads every French nobleman she finds with her axe. Only one witness on each ship is left alive to tell the story of what had happened. As word of Jean and her Black Fleet gets back to the king, she becomes known as the Lioness of Brittany. Word of this crazy redhead with these black ships that's f***ing up French merchant ships somehow gets back to the English, and they immediately recognize her as a valuable ally and begin funding her to keep up the good work. But Jean's reign of terror couldn't last forever, and in 1348, the French Navy finally tracked down her fleet. In a brutal battle, her fleet is destroyed and her flagship is boarded. But when the soldiers look for Jean, she's already long gone. She had escaped in a tiny boat with some members of her crew. With no food or water, they floated helplessly for 6 days, and some crew members ultimately did not survive the escape.
What, so now she's back to her little Temu army. So she went from massive pirate ships to these little, like, rowboats. She has to build up again, start from scratch. She can do it. She's done it once, she can do it again.
Finally, on the 7th day, Jean drifted onto English shores, half dead, but still alive enough to ruin King Philip VI's day. Upon landing in England, she was welcomed by King Edward III as a respected ally. With her ships and crew gone, she decides she had enough of the pirate life. 2 years later, her nemesis, King Philip VI, dies anyway, closing that chapter, and she meets and marries an English knight named Walter Bentley. They return to Brittany together, where she peacefully lived out the rest of her days, dying at the ripe age of 59. Which these days seems way too young, but for a mother of 7 in the 1300s who had also been, a freaking pirate, it was a pretty good run.
Bro, first of all, 59 years old, 59, that's like younger than my parents. And second of all, since when did she have 7 kids? But I guess she was married 3 times, so maybe that's how she was able to spawn so many kids. She was literally passed around like a blunt at a college party. That is insane. But yeah, I can already tell she would have been absolutely pissed off that she couldn't kill the king. The king died from natural causes. She wasn't fast enough to actually kill the king herself. But yeah, ultimately, maybe she was just crazy purely because of her red hair.
If my hair turns red, run.
Number 2, Jirozaemon. It's the end of the 17th century in Japan, and a wealthy charcoal dealer named Jirozaemon from the village of Sano is wandering around the bustling city of Edo. Running a successful business is tough, and Jiro needed some time off to recharge and thought the big city would be the best place to do just that. While walking around, he accidentally stumbles into the pleasure district of Yoshiwara.
Accidentally. You know what? I've accidentally tripped on a rock and I started violently sprinting towards the nearest pleasure district accidentally because of the rock that made me go towards that direction down the hill.
Whoops, how did that happen?
Whoops.
And there, he finds himself surrounded by the most beautiful women who all smile at him as he passes by. Jiro cannot help but stare back in awe and wave sheepishly as this was something he was totally not used to. You see, due to a case of smallpox he suffered as a child, his face was badly disfigured, and no woman back home would even look at him or give him the time of day. As he wanders around Yoshiwara, he spots a beautiful courtesan in the distance. He rushes over to get a better look, and she's hands down the most stunning woman he has ever seen. He follows her back to her establishment and learns her name is Yatsuhashi. She's an oiran, a courtesan of the highest class who only services nobles and the ultra-rich. As a successful businessman, Jiro had money, but merchants were on the lowest rung of the social ladder. Could he even have a shot to buy some time with this goddess of a woman? But to his surprise, Yatsuhashi smiles and accepts him. Now, it's important to note that at this time, the courtesans in this pleasure district had the right to turn away customers they didn't want to service. And so, for the first time in his life, Jiro seems to have found a woman who can look beyond his scarred face and see him for who he truly is.
Yeah, she looked past his scarred face and looked directly into his pockets, and she could see that he had multiple millions of dollars willing to spend. I guarantee the only reason why someone would turn down a customer is if, they could clearly see they don't have enough money. Because then it won't be worth it, in the end. Honestly, it would not be worth it.
He instantly falls in love. Nothing in his life matters anymore, and he stays in Edo spending all of his time with Yatsuhashi. He begins to shower her with the most extravagant gifts. No expense is too much for the love of his life.
Bitcoin.
But back home in Sano, without him around, Jiro's charcoal business begins to fall apart. The company soon goes bankrupt, and his home and all of his land are sold off to pay his debts. Without any new money coming in from his business, and having already spent all the money he had on Yatsuhashi, Jiro finds himself penniless, but he can't stop wandering around Yoshiwara obsessively trying to catch his love when she's walking about. One day, Jiro finally manages to catch Yatsuhashi walking in a procession of courtesans, and he calls out to her. She ignores him, and in that moment, he comes to the painful realization that his relationship with her was strictly business.
Yeah, because like I said before, she looked straight past that ugly face and looked directly into your wallet. She doesn't care how long your sword is. All she cares about is how deep your pockets are. And now that your business is burnt down, you have no new revenue coming in. So wait, this would be a bit of a weird life to live. Imagine running a really rich charcoal business that gives you let's say $5 million in profit every single year, and then every single day of the year you spend at this place with this woman, and you're spending maybe $3 million across the year every single year. It seems like heaven, but if you just think about it, that is just so weird. The only reason why you're trying to work hard is not to build your business so that you can impact the world positively, but it's just so that you have enough profit to just see this person every single day of the year.
She never had any real feelings for him. She was just humoring him for his money. I poured my heart out, spent my fortune. I'd heard courtesans were not sincere, but I believed Yatsuhashi was different. How could I have been so stupid to trust her? The pain is unbearable. So on December 19th, 1696, Jiro finds Yatsuhashi again walking through Yoshiwara in a procession, and in a final attempt yells out to her, "Please, could you just say one nice thing to me? I've lost everything because of you." Again, she ignores him and keeps walking. Finally recognizing he's truly lost everything, Jiro finally snaps. "How dare you ignore me after all this, you ungrateful wretch!" And he chases her to a tea house. Yatsuhashi is quickly escorted inside, but Jiro barges his way in and draws a short sword. According to some stories, it's a named blade called the Kagotsurube.
But it was still a short sword, bro, so I guess maybe this guy's sword was also too short as well, if you know what I'm saying. Maybe his dingaling was not long enough either. So not only are his pockets not deep enough, but his sword is not long enough. He got hit with the double whammy nerf. They nerfed his sword and they nerfed his pockets.
"You've humiliated me enough!" he shouts, and he rushes at Yatsuhashi, who's making her way up a staircase. He lunges at the woman he once thought to be the love of his life, and with a single stroke, slices her in half. Her legs and waist tumble down the staircase while her hands grip its railing. Jiro runs up the stairs past his former lover and onto the roof, attempting to escape. The commotion attracts the police, and neighbors try to hit him with long sticks to get him down, but he's swinging his sword like a madman. Eventually, someone throws a bucket of water on him, which causes him to slip and fall to the ground, where he's quickly captured and later sentenced to death.
Jesus Christ. Well, I guess that's the power of a Gooner. That's the full power of the Alpha Sigma male, but like Gooner edition. Gooners are absolutely crazy. They're a different breed. Like when they're on the Goon, they're actually different. Like you cannot control them. This guy was the first Gooner, the first ever Gooner to commit murder in Japan. But what if it was just a prank? Like what if this person was just pranking him and like she was gonna come back to him afterwards? But then he ruined the big reveal by just slicing her in half. But I guess the gooning fogged up his brain so much that he couldn't even like think about that like being a possible possibility.
Number 3. Jeffrey Hudson. It's 1619, and in the small town of Oakham, England, a boy named Jeffrey Hudson's born. While for the most part he looks like a completely normal newborn, his parents soon begin suspecting something is very wrong. Time passes and he learns to crawl, to walk, and to talk, but he never grows any taller than his birth height. At 3, he's still just 19 inches tall.
Jesus Christ, 19 inches tall? That is the same height as something I own on my body.
Now, back in the 1600s, little people were considered barely above animals, and Jeffrey's father was well aware of this. Looking at his tiny boy running around, he could only see an incredibly difficult life in store for him. What would happen to little Jeffrey when he and his wife passed away? Who would take care of him? Luckily, due to his job as the keeper of the baiting bulls for the Duke of Buckingham, Jeffrey's father saw one path that could possibly give his son a somewhat respectable life. So when Jeffrey turns 7, his father brings him to the Duchess of Buckingham and presents him as a gift. See, little people, or dwarfs as they were known back then, were often collected by nobility as curiosities that were used to entertain guests. Jeffrey was blessed in the sense that though he was small, he was perfectly proportionate with no deformities or disabilities. He was, for all intents and purposes, just a little person.
So he was a Smurf, pretty much. But his parents are just gonna abandon him, like, just because he's a Smurf? Like, I understand you're trying to give him a better shot at life, but at the same time, can't you just, I don't know, just like still be there and support him rather than just like, you know, just giving him up for like adoption?
The Duchess stares at Jeffrey like she's seeing a shiny Pokemon in real life and immediately accepts him and he joins her court. Now, around this time, the Duke and Duchess were expecting a visit from the King and his new French bride, Queen Henrietta Marie, and they thought that Jeffrey would be the ultimate surprise and delight for their dinner guests. At the banquet, a large pie is placed on the table in front of the royal couple. The Queen stares at the pie, wondering what surprise might be hiding inside, when suddenly, on command, Jeffrey, dressed in a tiny suit of armor, bursts from the pie crust and starts aggressively dueling an invisible opponent with his tiny sword. The Queen finds this hilarious. How is someone this small even real? She must have him. And so the Duchess gives Jeffrey to the Queen and he travels back with her to London.
Bro, what in the Disney movie is this? How can anybody be entertained by some sort of Smurf? And second of all, why is this guy just being adopted by every single person? This guy was like 3 years old, bro. At 3 years old, he would probably understand what is happening at this point.
Jeffrey joins the Queen's collection of oddities and quickly becomes her favorite.
Oddities?
She makes sure he has the best food and accommodations. He gets the formal education of a noble and servants that he can call upon for whatever he needs. Somehow, against all odds, being tiny was not the curse he thought, and miraculously it's brought him a wonderful life. He develops a deep affection for his queen and works hard to put on the best acts he can for her guests.
The Fortnite
His hit
emotes.
routine was one where he partnered with one of the Queen's other curiosities, a man named William Evans, who was a giant that stood over 7 feet tall. At dinner parties, Evans would pull out a loaf of bread from one pocket and then pull Jeffrey out of his other pocket, who would then cut the bread and serve it. Jeffrey was given the nickname Lord Minimus, and though he initially enjoyed the spoils of the royal life, he slowly became resentful of the golden cage he had found himself in.
Bro, they called him Lord Minimus. They should have called him Lord Farquaad. I think this might actually be the inspiration for Lord Farquaad.
He realized that no matter how educated he became or what skills he worked to acquire, he would always be treated like a joke and never truly accepted as an equal by anyone. But in 1642, Jeffrey found himself with the opportunity of a lifetime to prove he was more than just a court jester. See, while Jeffrey had been busy making nobles laugh, the Queen's husband, King Charles, had been busy alienating the entire parliament of his country. Charles believed he was God's chosen monarch, and rather predictably, this point of view was badly received by nearly everyone. And so by 1642, a massive civil war broke out. Supporting the king and his queen, Jeffrey fought to take a more active role in the war. He pleaded with the Queen for an official position in the royalist army, arguing that he was an expert horseman and a crack shot.
Bro, this Smurf wants to fight in the war. I guarantee as soon as he steps foot onto the battleground, somebody is going to confuse him for like a soccer ball and just kick him like Ronaldo. So they're going to hit the crossbar with his head and end up in a Sidemen crossbar challenge compilation video.
The queen eventually gives in and appoints the now 23-year-old Geoffrey to captain of the horse. While many in the court saw this as a joke, Geoffrey didn't care, and he took his new job and new title seriously. But in 1644, before he had any real shot to prove himself a man beyond his inches, the royalists were clearly losing this war, and the queen flees to her homeland of France, bringing Geoffrey with her. In France, court life resumes in much the same fashion as before the war, but Geoffrey has no intentions of returning to the life of an oddity. He was now Captain Geoffrey Hudson. Lord Minimus was gone, and he made it clear to everyone that he would not tolerate any further mockery. Any man who insulted him would pay with his life. A man named Charles Crofts thinks that Geoffrey's declaration of dignity is all an act and bursts out laughing. No one knows what Crofts said to Geoffrey, but it pissed him off, and he challenges Charles to a duel. Still laughing, Charles accepts this challenge from the great Lord Minimus, thinking this is all a part of a joke that will have a huge punchline in the end. But Geoffrey was not f***ing around at all. The date of the duel is set for October, and it would be conducted with pistols on horseback.
What? A duel with pistols on horseback? Shouldn't a duel either be like a fist fight or like a knife fight? What sort of duel is this? Because I guarantee if this guy 1v1 the other guy in like a proper fist fight, this guy would get drop kicked like a football. But I guess to be fair, the pistols on horsebacks kind of makes it a little bit equal. But life is not equal sometimes. You know, life is not equal. You should have just done a fist fight.
On the day of the duel, when it came time for weapons to be presented, Geoffrey pulls out his tiny custom pistol. Crofts snickers, reaches into his pocket, and dramatically reveals a squirt gun, earning applause and laughter from the crowd. But Geoffrey was done being laughed at. He tightened his grip on his pistol and orders for Crofts to be handed a real gun. Crofts is quickly outfitted with his own pistol and was like, "Wait, are you for real?" The two men then mounted their horses, ride to a distance, and face each other. The signal is given, and they each charge forward. Crofts fires first, missing Geoffrey's small frame, and with laughter from the crowd echoing in his ears, Geoffrey raises his pistol, aims, and fires. His bullet strikes Crofts in the middle of his forehead and sends him toppling backward off his horse, dead before he hits the ground.
Wait, so that means Geoffrey did have an advantage in this. It wasn't even an equal thing. He had the advantage because he had a smaller hitbox. That is actually not fair. His hitbox was 10 times smaller than the other guy. Because in a fist fight, this guy would have had the size advantage, like he would have beaten him. But in a horse fight, it's not even equal. I thought the horse fight was going to make it equal. But instead, now the small guy has the advantage because of the smaller hitbox. That is just annoying.
Bro, that's like not funny at all. The crowd is shocked into silence. The Queen's dwarf has just murdered a noble. By this time, dueling was illegal in France, and Geoffrey was quickly arrested and tried for murder. He's saved at the last possible moment by Queen Henrietta, who negotiates for him to be exiled instead of executed. And so she and Geoffrey say their final goodbyes, and he sails off from France. Geoffrey soon learns just how good life was, being laughed at as one of the Queen's curiosities when he's quickly captured at sea by Barbary pirates. He's sold into slavery and spends the next 25 years as a slave in North Africa. He finally escapes and makes it back to England just in time for a severe anti-Catholic purge and is thrown into prison for 2 years for being Catholic. He eventually is released and dies just a few short years later in 1682, penniless, and is buried in an unmarked grave.
Damn, he should have just stayed in France, bro. If he just stayed in France, he would have lived a nice life. But instead, he lives 25 years in slavery. Okay, so you'd rather live 25 years in slavery as a respected person compared to living in France as a what is it? Like, what do they call it? As an oddity? Is that what they say? But I guess this is where the term short man syndrome comes from. So I think this guy definitely had some severe, unbelievably severe short man syndrome. He was so short that he just wanted to be taken seriously as like a non-short person. So yeah, I guess the moral of the story is don't be short.